Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's council meeting for Monday, the 24th of September 2018. And we start with the opening prayer and acknowledgement of original custodians. If we'd all stand, please. Lord, we ask that you guide us in our decision-making, protect us in the community we serve from all that is evil, and strengthen our unity for the welfare of the city. Amen. I would like to acknowledge the Wiradjuri people as the traditional custodians of the land that we meet upon today, and pay my respects to the elders, both past, present and future, for they hold the memories, culture, tradition and hopes of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that contribute to our community. Thank you. CM2, I wish to advise that this council meeting is being webcast and recorded. By speaking at this council meeting, you agree to being recorded and webcast. Please ensure that if and when you are speaking at this council meeting that you are respectful to other people and use appropriate language. AlburyCity accepts no liability for any defamatory or offensive remarks or gestures made during the course of this council meeting. An audio recording will be made for administrative purposes. CM3, conflict of interest declarations received by the Chair. I've received no declarations. Mr Zaknich.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. No other declarations received, but this advice relates to disclosure of political donations and requirements of the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act 1979. The Act under Section 147 requires a person submitting planning applications or submissions regarding a planning application to disclose any reportable political donation and or gifts to any local councillor or employee of council. Reportable political donations include those of or above $1,000. In dealing with development applications, councillors need to take into account specific matters contained in the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act. Accordingly, the provisions of Section 79C1 of that Act are set out in the Council Officer's report detailing issues to be considered. The Local Government Act 1993, Section 375A requires that a division be called whenever a motion for a planning decision is put at a meeting of the Council. Planning decision means a decision made in the exercise of a function of council under the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act, including a decision relating to a development application, an environmental planning instrument, a development control plan or a development contribution plan under that Act, but not including the making of an order under Division 2A of Part 6A of that Act. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Zaknich. Apologies, CM4. We have none. All accounted for. There is no mayoral minute. CM6, the election of mayor, September 2018 to 2020. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I would move that Council 1 invites nominations and undertakes the process of election for the position of mayor for the next 2 years. And 2, resolve that the mayoral election be held at the last ordinary council meeting in September, where the election of the mayor is not the first election or an election to fill a casual vacancy. And 3, include the timing for the mayoral election in the revised Code of Meeting Practice when it is next presented to Council.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. Councillor Cameron.
Second the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, do you wish to speak to that at all?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor. It's quite clear.
Thank you. Councillor Vanderven, you have a question?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just a clarification on item 2. Whilst we know that the mayoral term is 2-year, should we just put that in there because it doesn't actually indicate that it is every second year?
Yep, sounds reasonable. Mr Zaknich?
It's a part of the Local Government Act, surely, Mr Mayor.
Yeah, it is part of the Local Government Act, but I have no issue including it at this point. Mr Zaknich?
Thanks for the question, Mr Mayor. The provisions are clear in the Act and the legislation's the overriding principle.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Vanderven, comfortable with that?
If that's the view, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. On that note, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Mr Zaknich will now conduct the election. Thank you, Mr Zaknich.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The election of Mayor for AlburyCity for the period 2018 to 2020. I have 2 nominations received at this point in time, Councillor Mack and Councillor Vanderven. Are there any other nominations? There are no other nominations, so I declare nominations closed. I'll now conduct the election for the position of Mayor. Method of voting is by open voting by show of hands. So in order of receipt of the nominations, all those councillors voting for Councillor Mack as Mayor, please raise your hand. Councillor Stutchbury, Councillor Cameron, Councillor Mack, Councillor Conn, Councillor King, Councillor Thurley. All those councillors voting for Councillor Vanderven, please raise your hand. Councillor Doxey, Councillor Glacken, Councillor Vanderven. 3 votes to 6 votes for Councillor Mack. Accordingly, I declare Councillor Kevin Mack elected as Mayor for the ensuing mayoral term till 2020. Congratulations.
Thank you, Mr Zacknich. Thank you, councillors. CM7, election of Deputy Mayor, September 2018 to 2020. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that Council A makes an appointment to the position of Deputy Mayor with the term of appointment the same as for the Mayor, and B, invite nominations and undertake the process of election for the position of Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. Looking for a seconder? Councillor Stutchbury.
Second that, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, do you wish to speak to that?
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Cameron, you wish to speak against?
I wish to move an amendment, Mr Mayor.
Yep,
My
we'll
amendment
deal
is-
with the amendment. What's the amendment?
My amendment is that Council A make an appointment to the position of Deputy Mayor for a term of 12 months, with a re-election to occur in the last council meeting of September 2019, and B remains unaltered, so B would read, invites nominations and undertakes the process of election for the position of Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. Just wait for that to come up on the screen. 1 year, it's there. Councillor Vanderven.
Happy to second that amendment, Mr.
Thank you. Did you wish to open debate on the amendment, Councillor Cameron?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Stutchbury used to speak against the amendment.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. This amendment proposed by Councillor Cameron, I don't believe is being made in the spirit of how this council should be run. It's no secret that Councillor Cameron is not enamoured of...
Point of order, Mr Chair.
Councillor Vanderven.
Point of order, that's totally out of line, the comments that Councillor Stutchbury is making. He has.
Point of order, Mr Mayor.
Yes, Councillor Cameron.
I haven't heard anything inappropriate yet.
Happy for Councillor Stutchbury to continue at this point.
should
Councillor
I
Stutchbury.
apologise to Councillor Vanderven for upsetting him, or should I continue?
Continue.
Okay. Look, I'll cut it short. Councillor Cameron is not moving this amendment in attempting to make this council run more smoothly or more functionally. He's making it, I think, for other reasons which I disagree. So I will not be supporting this amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Stutchbury. Councillor Vanderven, speaking for.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. On the contrary, I'd like to oppose the view of Councillor Stutchbury and point out that perhaps the elections so far and possibly what will continue to be are not in the best interest, and not in the best interest of our community either. So that's why I'd be speaking for this amendment and against the original motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Vanderven. There appears to be no further speakers for or against. Councillor Cameron, did you wish to sum up?
As best I can. I've got limited speaking voice tonight, which might please someone, or some people. Excuse me. Councillor Stutchbury is, of course, entitled to his opinion, but it is only that. I don't think I've made clear what my motivation is for seeking a one-year term for the Deputy Mayor's position, but I'm happy to do that now so that there's no undercurrent of disharmony or any lack of fraternity in our council. My thinking on this is that simply the Deputy Mayor's role is an apprentice role. It gives people a chance to showcase what they may be capable of before they seek higher office. It also provides an opportunity for people to get experience and to share that experience around the council. I think the move to 2-year terms for the Mayor was a good step forward. It was one of the few reforms that I agree with in the recent changes to the Local Government Act. But the way is left open deliberately for us to have a 1-year term for Deputy Mayor, and I think we need to make it available to those who might wish to pursue it. Currently, I cannot pursue it due to personal interests. I'm sorry, I'll rephrase that, due to work commitments. But in 12 months' time, who knows, perhaps my work situation will be different, and I would be very keen indeed to take up the opportunity if I could garner the support to run for that position. So it's of little consequence to me who fills it for the next 12 months, but I would like to see that there's an opportunity for someone else to do it in 12 months' time. I think that's to both our community and to our council's benefit to share around experience and give people a chance to develop in the role. Nothing malign in it at all. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Cameron. On that note, I'm happy to put the amendment. All those in favour of the amendment? Those against? The amendment is lost, so we'll deal with the original motion. Thank you. Thank you. So we're dealing with the original motion that was moved by Councillor Thurley, I believe, and seconded by Councillor Stutchbury. Okay, so Councillor Thurley, did you wish to open debate on that item?
Given the previous debate, it perhaps it would be advisable for me to say something. I don't see any reason why we should change a team that has worked well. I don't see any reason why a 2-year term for the Deputy Mayor is not an appropriate thing to do. I do understand Councillor Cameron's stated aim that it gives the opportunity for others to get experience, but you gain your experience sitting here in the council chamber, debating, reading your papers and doing the work. And I don't think that just changing it to 1-year term makes much difference. I would rather have the stability, the community and council know who's leading the team for the next 2 years, and so I speak strongly in favour of this original motion.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. On that note, happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Mr Zachnich.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll now conduct the elections for the position of Deputy Mayor for the 2-year term, 2018 to 2020. I've received 2 nominations, one from Councillor Con and the other from Councillor van der Ven. Are there any other nominations for Deputy Mayor? There are no other nominations. I therefore declare nominations closed and will conduct the election. In order of receipt of the nominations, all those councillors voting for Councillor Con, please raise your hand. Councillor Stutchbury, Councillor Mack, Councillor Con, Councillor King and Councillor Thurley. And councillors voting for Councillor van der Ven, Councillor Doxey, Councillor Cameron, Councillor Glacken and Councillor van der Ven. I therefore declare Councillor Con elected as Deputy Mayor for the ensuing mayoral term to 2020. Congratulations.
Thank you, Mr Zachnich. Thank you, councillors. I need to now declare that we're having a short break for media and photographs, and we'll resume very shortly. Thank you. 6:15. We'll just keep going. Welcome back, councillors. The time is 6:26. Resuming our meeting, we have CM8, the action plans for noting and progress. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move the following action plans be received and noted. 1, actions complete for noting only. 2, actions in progress. And 3, long-term issues more than 3 months.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury.
I'd like to second that, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, wish to speak to that?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Happy to put that motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. CM9, the confirmation of minutes of the previous meeting held on Monday the 10th of September. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Vanderman.
Move that those minutes of the council meeting held on Monday, 10 September 2018 at 6 p.m. be confirmed.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury.
Second that, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Vanderman, did you wish to speak to that?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
There being no questions or debate, happy to move that motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. There are no reports from community forums, no notices of motion. CM12, reports and minutes of committees and working parties. 12.1, the minutes of the Joint Hume Federation Zones Bushfire Management Committees, held on Thursday the 14th of June. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that the minutes and recommendations of the Joint Hume Federation Zones Bushfire Management Committee meeting held on Thursday 14th of June 2018 be received, noted and accepted.
Thank you. Councillor Doxey.
Happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Thurley, you wish to speak to that at all?
No, fairly routine matter.
Thank you. Happy to move those minutes. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you. 12.2, the minutes of the Albury Airport's User Advisory Group. Councillor Glacken.
Happy to move the minutes and recommendations of the Albury Airport Users Advisory Committee meeting held on Wednesday the 5th of September 2018 be received, noted and accepted.
Thank you. Councillor Vanderman.
Happy to second that, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Glacken, did you wish to speak to that at all?
No, thank you.
On that note, I'm happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you. 12.3, the minutes of the Murray-Darling Association Region 1 meeting held on Friday the 24th of August. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move the minutes and recommendations of the Murray-Darling Association Region 1 meeting held on Friday 24th of August 2018 be received, noted and accepted.
Thank you. Councillor Glacken.
Yes, Mr Mayor, happy to second Councillor Thurley's recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, do you wish to speak to that?
I will very briefly on this one. A couple of issues. The 76th annual conference of the MDA will be held in 2020, and the MDA is calling for expressions of interest from councils who wish to host that. I think those expressions of interest are required to be submitted prior to the end of October, and the conference itself will probably be held in the third week of October 2020. So it would be a good opportunity for this council. It's been quite a while since the MDA had a conference, a national conference here. And it is a great opportunity to showcase the region and so on. I guess the only other point that I'd like to make out of that meeting, we had an address by Goulburn Murray Water talking specifically about groundwater and its regulation. And this arose because at least one of our councils in this area, Indigo Shire, has some issues relating to the use of groundwater. And the idea of this meeting was a presentation by Goulburn Murray Water to explain what the rules and regulations are with respect to the use of groundwater. And that was a particularly useful presentation. So that's all I wish to say. Thank you.
I have a question from Councillor Glacken. Councillor Glacken?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Through you to Councillor Thurley. He raised the issue of the council and another council and the use of groundwater. Can I confirm that it is the commercial use of groundwater? please.
Councillor Thurley.
It was always commercial use, whether it's used on a farm or an orchard, but this is a different use, so that it's extraction of groundwater for bottled water. The regulations in Victoria at the moment don't allow any council to have any voice in the way the water is used, and I will come back to this in the furthermost my delegates report about the Murray-Darling Association conference.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Gleichen. On that, I'll put that motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Presentation of Deputy... Oh, it's 12.4, the minutes of the Sustainability Advisory Committee meeting held on Tuesday the 28th of August. Councillor Conn.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that the minutes and recommendations of the Sustainability Advisory Committee be received, noted and accepted.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley.
I'll second that motion, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Conn, did you wish to speak to that report?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll save my comments for the Sustainability Activity Committee report later in the agenda.
Okay, thank you. There are no further questions or debate. Happy to put that motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. CM15 Officers Reports for consideration. 15.1 LG New South Wales Annual Conference Additional Voting Delegates. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Gleichen.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. To move the recommendation slightly altered, that council determine that the attendees and voting delegates to the conference be councillors Mack, Conn, Cameron and Gleichen.
Thank you, Councillor Gleichen. Do I have a seconder? Thank you. Councillor Statutory.
Yes, Mr Mayor, I'll second that.
Thank you. Councillor Gleichen, do you wish to speak to that?
Very briefly, Mr Mayor, there are 4 councillors listed in the report as having registered to attend. There are 4 positions for voting delegates. It has been previously agreed that the Mayor and Deputy Mayor would be 2 of those 4 positions, and it seems logical that Councillor Cameron and myself would therefore be the subsequent 2, Mr Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you for the motion. Councillor Vanderven, you have a question?
Mr Mayor, I believe that I did register interest in attending the conference, but somewhere along the line that's been missed, but I'm happy with the motion as it stands.
So you want it noted that you're still
I was surprised that my name wasn't there. Thank you.
Mr Sack said he'll follow it up in due course. Thank you, Councillor Vanderven. So, Councillor Cameron, you wish to speak for?
If Councillor Vanderven wants to go, I'm happy to.
I'm fine. Thank you.
Okay. So on that note, there are no further questions or debate. I'm happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Councillor Gleichen. 15.2 Committees and Working Parties Register. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Vanderven.
Maybe my voice is better than some other councillors at the moment to read this one out. I'll move that Council A elect and or appoint its representatives to the following committees and working parties. I, a second councillor delegate in addition to the Mayor and Councillor Vanderven to 2 cities, 1 community. Aye. Lake Hume Land and On Water Management Plan Community Reference Group. Aye. Murray Lower Darling Customer Advisory Group, 2017-2019. 1-4, Albury Airport Users Advisory Committee. Substitute Delegate 5, Mama Advisory Committee Substitute Delegate. 6, Other Relevant Committee Working Party following advice at the meeting. And 7, I want to delete 7 from that particular item, and B, adopt the revised 2018-19 AlburyCity Committees and Working Parties Register. So just a slight amendment. I want to item 7 removed from my motion. Thank you.
Okay, yep. Councillor Doxey.
I'll second that, Mr Mayor. We didn't press the button.
Your button was depressed according to the screen, but anyway, you're happy to second that amended motion.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor.
No problem. Councillor Vanderman, did you wish to speak to your
Thank you,
amended motion?
Mr Mayor. Just explanation on item 3. I'm the Murray Lower Darling Customer Advisory Group delegate and went through an application process, and Mr Brad Ferris is the substitute or a delegate. And I've been to 2 or 3 meetings now of this particular group and find that my presence at that group is a total waste of time. Only from the perspective that I don't understand the politics, that is a historical leftover from the group that formed this particular advisory group, and I am finding it difficult to make any meaningful contribution to the group on the basis that they're carrying on historical arguments that go back 15 and 20 years, and I have absolutely no knowledge or can make any input into the decision-making process as far as trying to resolve those issues are concerned. So that's why that vacancy is there. The last one, I was under the strong impression that unless somebody actually didn't want to be on a particular committee, we had if you like, an understanding amongst the councillors that there would not be any challenge to incumbent people on those committees, and I find it quite interesting that there was 2 other nominations for the local traffic committee, and whilst it was a committee that I also enjoyed being on, there's no reason why we can't have a second or a third person on that committee, but I would like to see Councillor Doxey remain as chair of that committee on the basis of the fact that he has some continuity in that role, and I've always been able to feed my input back to Councillor Doxey to have it raised at those meetings and dealt with. So I don't see any change required for that local traffic committee, so that's why I left it out of the my original motion. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Vanderman. Councillor Stubbs, you have a question?
I do, thank you, Mr Mayor. Through you to the relevant member of staff, could we all please be appraised of what the situation is in regards to the changing or not of external committee members? I was not aware of the situation outlined by Councillor Van der Ven whereby this is not the done thing.
Mr Zachnich.
Thanks for the question, through you, Mr Mayor. So the process that the council goes through is annually the committees are reviewed. Councillors may continue to nominate themselves for those roles or not, as is the case. Where there are more than one interest from more than one councillor for a particular committee, then the normal process is for the council to elect that representative, notwithstanding the fact that one or other of those councillors may wish to stay on that committee. They both nominate on an annual basis unless there are no other nominees, and then, as you've seen in the report, we deal with them by exception. The same is the case in this instance, where the Traffic Committee has, at this stage, 3 expressions of interest. That would be dealt with by the nomination process and a vote of the council by show of hands, as you've seen tonight in the election process, and that is the process we would go through, notwithstanding Councillor Van der Ven's comments.
Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you.
My pleasure. So I'm happy. There's no further question or debate. Councillor Van der Ven, do you wish to close debate on that?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
So I'm happy to put this as the motion or amended motion. I note Councillor Cameron is not in the chamber, but at this point I'm happy to put the motion as is. All those in favour? Those against? The motion is carried. Okay, so we now need to seek nominations for the second councillor delegate for the 2 Cities 1 Community. Councillor Glacken?
Sorry, I was going to My intention was to move that we receive nominations for that, so I do apologise.
Yeah, no worries. So we're seeking nominations for that position. Councillor Doxey?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I nominate Councillor Glacken.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Glacken, you happy to accept that nomination?
Yes, thank you.
Councillor Vanderman?
I was going to nominate Councillor King.
Okay, Councillor King, did you wish to accept that nomination?
I do.
Okay, so we have Councillor Glacken and Councillor King at this point wishing to nominate for the committee.
And there is one position?
Yeah.
And the previous incumbent was Councillor King?
That's right.
Okay, I withdraw my nomination.
Okay, I'm happy to accept the withdrawal of your nomination and announce Councillor King as a member of that committee. Two cities, one community. Number 2, the Lake Hume Land and On-Water Management Plan Committee Reference Group. Do I have a nomination for that committee? Councillor King, is your button depressed or is it... Councillor Vanderman?
I was going to nominate Councillor King again because he's been quite keen on this this water stuff for quite some time.
Councillor King?
Look, I'll accept the nomination. I withdrew from this committee last time because I thought the 2 City 1 community involvement might be a little bit more than it is. It hasn't turned out to be like that, so I'll accept the nomination.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Vanderman. There are no further nominations, so I'm happy to appoint Councillor King as that representative of the Lake Hume Land and On-Water Management Plan Community Reference Group. Number 3, Murray Lower Darling Customer Advisory Group, 1719. And I might just preface this one as being Ramjo responsibility as well. So if there were not councillors that were interested in this committee, then the matter would be referred to Ramjo for consideration of councillors from other councils. It may be more across the historical issues that you stated, Councillor Vanderman, because they're always chatting about water at Ramjo. So do we have any nominations on that note? Happy to refer that on to the River and Murray Joint Organisation for consideration. Thank you, councillors. The Albury Airports User Advisor Committee, the substitute delegate. Councillors, do we have one? Nomination. No, it was Councillor... The User Advisory Committee was yourself, Councillor Vanderman, Councillor Glacken. Oh, that's right. So there's 2 members. We need another substitute. Is that the way we're going? Yep. Did you wish to nominate anyone, Councillor Glacken?
Yes, if I can, I'd just like to check with if we could please, whether Councillor Doxey was interested.
Okay. Councillor Doxey, are you interested in that committee?
Is that a paid position?
No, you don't get business class airfares.
Mr Mayor, thank you.
Okay. In the absence of any other nominations, happy to appoint Councillor Doxey as that representative, Albury Airport User Advisor Committee. The Mama Advisory Committee, the substitute delegate, councillors. Councillor Glacken.
I'm happy to nominate if no one else is interested in that. I'm not sure who the previous substitute was. But vacant. Okay.
It's vacant. Yep.
Councillor Vacant.
Councillor Vacant, apparently. Being absence of any other nominations, Councillor Glacken, happy to accept you as the substitute delegate for Mama Advisory Committee. So I think we're done. And we have any other relevant committee working parties following advice of the meeting, Councillor? Mr Zachnich.
No other advice at this time, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Congratulations, all councillors. You're appointed onto those committees, and we shall move on. Okay, 15.3, the proposed formation of regional cities, New South Wales. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Vanderman.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This is one of our more significant efforts. So I'll move that Council A receive and note this report. B, join Regional Cities New South Wales, RCNSW, with the formal review of Council's membership to take place within the first 24 months of the formal commencement of RC New South Wales to ensure it is meeting its stated objectives. C, note that while 16 councillors have been invited to join RC New South Wales or RCNSW, a minimum of 9 councillors will be needed to establish RCNSW, and D, allocate $5,000 for membership of RCNSW from 1 January 2019 to 30 June 2019.
Thank you, Councillor Vanderman. Councillor Stuchbury?
Oh, Mr Mayor, I'd like to second that.
Thank you. Councillor Vanderman, do you wish to speak to that?
Look, this is one of the more significant things regionally that this Albury City Council has been working towards for the last probably 3, 4, 5 years, when the joint organisations were first mooted by the New South Wales government back then. So I think that this is an important step in the process, and yeah, look forward to the support. I just have one query. Is that correct that that's only for a 6-monthly membership, that $5,000? Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Vanderman. Thank you, Councillor Vanderman. Councillor Stush, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll preface my question by agreeing with Councillor Vanderven that this is quite a significant move, and I support it fully. My question is this. I was quite fond of geography at school, and I was looking at all these cities that have been either invited or agreed to join, and there just seems to be a bit of a blank space in the state of New South Wales, which is essentially the south coast or the southeast of the state. There are a couple of cities there, so I was just wondering, were any of the regional cities down there in the southeast of the state invited and chose not to join, or were they just not invited?
Well, I can answer that question as the chair of the Inland Forum of Cities that put the invitation out for this particular forum. The cities that currently exist on the coast do not fit the criteria which was set by the group originally. It's not to preclude the fact that they can't propose to join, and that would be considered. Queanbeyan is considered to be in the southeastern corner that you mentioned, and does become a service centre to a lot of those coastal areas. So essentially it was considered that Queanbeyan Palerang would take the lion's share role, and if there was a desired need for a growth spurt along the particular coastline you speak of, there's a number that could potentially represent that, and Monaro would be one of those, and probably Bateman's Bay could be another determinant on their growth. But at this point, the criteria, which also talks about regional service centres, Queanbeyan, Palerang would certainly fit that bill, and associated with the ACT next door, it was very difficult to ignore that. So I think it doesn't preclude them from applying, but at this point it was very difficult to split the cities that were on that particular coastal route, the eastern seaboard, because a lot of them are merged and amalgamated councils of different sizes. You comfortable with that?
Thank you for that very detailed answer.
Thank you. Had to be detailed. There being no further question or debate, I'd just like to reaffirm Councillor Vanderman's position on this particular issue as the chair of the Inland Forum of Cities, which were the 7 cities from Albury to Armidale. It was determined that the regional New South Wales model would look similar to the regional Victorian model, and certainly and the Regional Capitals Australia model. We feel that as collective cities in New South Wales that we lack regional representation of our cities, and particularly with population growth being as it is, it was considered a strategic opportunity to bring those 16 cities to the table and have the mature discussion about a collaborative arrangement, and it was warmly received by those cities, and at no point did anyone voice any issue with moving forward. We held a comprehensive workshop, a full day in Sydney, talking about the potential issues that may or may not exist, and I must acknowledge the Mayor of Wodonga is in the room and a former chair of Regional Capitals Victoria. So we took a lot from the advice that they provided, and certainly Regional Capitals Australia provided us, and it's a great outcome, and I reiterate what Councillor Vanderven has said. It's something that we should be very proud of, that was led by Albury City and Tamworth City to enable this to become a New South Wales first. So congratulations all involved, and I thank Councillor Vanderven for his words. And Councillor Vanderven, on that note, did you wish to close debate?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
On that note, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. 15.4, the Sustainability Advisory Committee report. Councillor Con.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that Council endorse the extension of the tenure of the current committee by 2 years and invite by an expression of interest an additional 3 members. I suppose that motion should clarify that that's regarding the Sustainability Advisory Committee.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley.
Second the motion, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Con, did you wish to speak to that particular motion?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. Firstly, to acknowledge the efforts of the community members who have been a part of that committee for the last 2 years. There's certainly some very passionate community members, and it's fantastic that we can incorporate their views and also their connections to the wider community. I also wanted to acknowledge Councillor Thurley, who's been the chair of the Sustainability Committee for the last 2 years, and who's also done an excellent job leading that group. I support the recommendation to extend the tenure of the current committee because they're currently looking at some extremely complicated issues that have taken some time to get all of our heads around, including the legislation changes regarding biodiversity in New South Wales, Council's review of the Development Control Plan, the Integrated Transport Strategy, and as of our most recent meeting, we've also been introduced to the Integrated Water Cycle Management Strategy and Drought Management Strategy, which an external consultant's going to be completing for us over a period of 40 weeks. So given the amount of time it's taken for committee members to get their heads around those issues, I would be very keen to see those committee members continue for another 2 years and not replace them. And I also welcome the opportunity for an additional 3 community members to join us.
Thank you, Councillor Con. I have a speaker for, but I have a question from Councillor Cameron.
Sorry, thank you, Mr Mayor. It's still not clear to me how the final selection would be made of new members for this committee. What would be the normal process? Could I inquire through you to the most appropriate member of staff?
Yes, you may. Mr Keys.
Through you, Mr Mayor, Council invite expressions of interest from the community. We'd reach out to our networks and seek expressions of interest once they're received, depending on the numbers. If we receive 3 or less, then we'd seek an appointment and we'd resolve that through Council. If we have more than that, we'd engage with those community representatives and probably put a report back to the SAC committee itself to make sure that we had a broad representation from various interest groups, and those new nominees could be picked up or could cover off areas that we don't have expertise or interest in the committee, and we'd subsequently make a further report back to Council for endorsement.
Thank you, Mr Keys. Councillor Cameron, are you comfortable with that? Thank you. Councillor Thurley, you wish to speak for?
Very briefly, I've been on the committee for 6 years, chair for 2. It was previously chaired by Councillor Betteridge, and it really is one of the communities that contributes quite a lot to the council's operations and to our forward strategies. Some of the members, at least one, has been on the committee for the whole 6 years that I've been there as well. It's a great committee. They work hard. They're passionately interested in sustainability and other issues of that nature, and I do support this expression of interest for 3 additional members.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. Councillor Con, do you wish to close debate?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
On that note, I'm happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. CM 15.5, Development Application 10.2018.36248.1, Solar Facility. Thank you, Councillor Vandervan.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll move that Council A receive and note the contents of this report, and B, grant consent to Development Application 10.2018.36248.1 for Solar Facility, Albury Waste Management Centre, subject to the conditions contained in the draft determination.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley.
Second the motion, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Vandervan, I have a question. Did you wish me to take the question for the open debate?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Con, you have a question?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Through you to the relevant member of staff, please. With regards to this development that may provide us with the opportunity for behind-the-meter power at our waste management facility, I'm wondering if any cost-benefit calculations have been done to look at the possibility of electric vehicles as part of Council's fleet.
Mr Lawson.
Mr Lawson.
Through you, Mr Mayor. So at this stage, Council hasn't done any cost-benefit analysis of that scenario. I guess we're in the infancy of looking at electric and hybrid fleet. We do have hybrids in our current passenger fleet at the minute, and there are some incentives in looking at purchasing, obviously, with our pool vehicles, EV vehicles. with regard to bigger construction equipment, there needs to be a lot more work done with regard to the technology and how that's moving. Obviously, there's some issues around charging, downtime, all those sorts of things. But certainly, there is some opportunities in looking at hybrid and electric vehicles.
Councillor Con, happy with that?
Yeah, thanks. I look forward to receiving that information when you've got it.
Thank you. Councillor Van Aven, just open debate.
5 words. This is a no-brainer. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Van Aven. There being no further question or debate, happy to put the motion as a division. All those in favour? Councillor Stutchbury, Councillor Doxey, Councillor Cameron, Councillor Mack, Councillor Con, Councillor King, Councillor Glacken, Councillor Thurley and Councillor Van Aven. That motion is carried unanimously. Thank you. CM 15.6, the development application 10.2018.3680.1, 142 Sarah's Drive, Thurgoona. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that Council A receive and note the contents of the report, and B, grant consent to development application 10.2018.36180.1 for the construction of 4 industrial units, car parking and signage at Lot 24 in DP 11236667, addressed as 142 Sarah's Drive, Thurgoona, be approved subject to the conditions contained in the draft determination included at attachment 3 to the report.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. Councillor Stutchbury.
Second that, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, I have a question. Did you wish me to start with a question?
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Con.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Through you to the relevant member of staff, please. Noting that this site drains to the south into Gilgai, which is an endangered ecological community, just hoping to be provided with information about how staff will monitor compliance during construction to make sure that stormwater runoff won't affect that ecological community.
Mr Keys.
Mr Mayor, thank you for the question. With the appointment of our recent appointment of our Development Compliance Officer, we've got a greater capacity to get out and about and to review these sites whilst construction is underway. We'll certainly be undertaking that. We've identified a number of sites across the area that when we have rain forecast or rainfall events, we're out there and actively patrolling those. We'll add this to the list.
Councillor Con, comfortable with that?
Yes, thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, did you start the debate?
Oh, thank you, Mr Mayor. It's a fairly straightforward application and report.
Thank you. There being no further question or debate, I'm happy to put that motion as a division. All those in favour? We have Councillor Stutchbury, Councillor Doxey, Councillor Cameron, Councillor Mack, Councillor Con, Councillor King, Councillor Glacken, Councillor Thurley and Councillor Van Aven. The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. Development application 501 Garden Street, 10.2018.36090.1. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that Council A receive and note the contents of this report, and B, determine that development application 10.2018.36090.1 for a dual occupancy development at Lot 731 in DP 753326, addressed as 501 Garden Street, Albury, be approved subject to the conditions contained in the draft determination included at attachment 4 to this report.
Thank you, Councillor Stutchbury. Councillor Thurley.
I'll second the motion, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury, did you wish to open debate?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. There's been some objections to this development, which I've read, and I've read the planning department's responses to those, and I'm satisfied. I've driven past and had a look myself, and certainly the house that is currently on that block is past its use-by date and could well be knocked over and rebuilt. The area is a heritage area regarding, I think, the monument, but the building itself is not heritage, so I think a newer and better building on that site is probably not a bad thing.
Thank you, Councillor Stutchbury. There appears to be no further questions or debate. I just have one question, probably to Mr Keys, in relation to the 94A contributions. I find it interesting that given that we take 1% of the cost of which includes demolition and creation of this building, the squareage of this building in house squares is 84 squares, and it's being built for $786,500, which includes demolition and excavation, which I believe excavation was at $30,000 down to street level. I just wonder how we go about validating these types of quotes, because I think it's a little bit on the light side, and being on the light side, I'd like to know who the builder is so I can employ them. Mr. Keys.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, thank you again for the question. In the instances where we have developments of this nature, of this sort of value, we ask for a cost summary report to be provided, and that's to be verified, and it's a statement made by a person who's been involved in the building industry as to what the total costs are. It includes a breakdown of all elements of the cost of development, and we rely on that in terms of the information that's provided to us. If there are substantial and very glaring irregularities, then we may follow that up. We'll certainly do so in this instance if that's recommended by council.
I just find it quite interesting. It's 84 point whatever squareage that I've estimated at under roof, and that includes a triple garage and 5 car garages. There's 2 at the front and 3 at the back. But even if you average that out at 12,000 a square, it works out at more than 786,000 on a very steep block. So I just can't understand why that didn't bring something or ring a few bells, Mr. Keys. Are you comfortable with that, or?
Through Mr. Mayor, comfortable with
the current?
I've been provided
quote?
with a statement by a person who's licensed and involved in the building industry.
Mm-hmm.
We put the emphasis on those people to make true and correct statements. Unless we're provided with directly conflicting information, we have to rely on the information that's provided to us. I'm certainly happy to follow that up and take it further if that's requested.
I probably would like you to have a look at it, because I think it's fairly undervalued at this point, and certainly I can't see how a 30k excavation on that site would even start to raise enough ground for that garage to be at street level, looking at the site.
We'll certainly do that, Mr.
If you can take it on notice, that'd be fantastic. Thank you. Councillor Cameron, you have a question?
Yes, through you to the most appropriate member of staff. Like all of us, I've received the complaints from the objector in this matter, and my understanding is that the central complaint that the property is only on a 1 centimetre setback from the boundary, and it'll be a 3-storey building, which will significantly overlook the backyard of the objector in question. That is an agreed fact, isn't it?
Mr. Keys.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Again, thank you, Councillor Cameron, for the question. The exact height of the building it varies because of the slope of the land. It's a very steeply sloping site. At the rear of the, with direct reference to the unit at the rear, the second building, it does have a form of 3 levels from the rear of that building, but at the front, on the street frontage, it only takes on the form of 2-storey. And it has direct reference to the existing garage on the neighbouring block. It represents 2-storey versus a 1-storey building from that frontage in Payne Place. So there is a discrepancy, again, because of the steep slope on the site and the way the construction's been designed to meld into that.
Small supplementary question, Mr.
Yes.
So often in planning, and I'm beginning to think that the majority of our planning variations or disputes or arguments tend to be around setbacks. I know that we're conducting a major review at the moment, but what is the purpose of a 1 centimetre setback? I mean, it seems to me to be neither use nor ornament. Can you elucidate on that, please, Mr. Keys?
Mr. Keys.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Again, thank you for the question, Councillor Cameron. One of the, I guess, outcomes of having a 1 centimetre setback as opposed to a 0 setback is they don't need the adjoining owner's consent to lodge the application. It's not on a common boundary. It's actually off the boundary, albeit technically it's 10 millimetres. But that is one of the provisions.
Councillor Cameron, comfortable with that?
Yeah, I'd like to speak against the motion.
Thank you. I've just got a couple of questions. You happy for me to take them? Councillor Vanderman, question?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just following up on the issues that you raised earlier, and not necessarily talking about this particular application, on the basis of the fact that we rely on outside sources to provide us with a costing of the development, and we charge our Section 94A contributions around that number, do we ever go back and say, well, what was the actual cost of the building, and retrospectively look at what that means in terms of what we might have lost in Section 94A contributions, on the basis that, well, we know even with our own projects there are cost overruns and variations that occur, and are these at any stage, taken into account before final approval is given for the development?
Mr. Keys.
Mr. Mayor, again, thank you for the question, Councillor Van der Ven. I'll touch on the last point first, if I can. Retrospectively, trying to amend a consent is not permitted, and that's where the in the conditions of consent is where we levy the cost for our Section 94 contribution, and that is based on the cost estimates at the time the consent is issued. In regards to looking at the estimates as they come in, we do have we use a nationally recognised valuers construction handbook that provides a square metre ratage. If we do see obvious discrepancies, our staff are inclined to follow that up and chase that up. I'd have to take this one on notice, and I certainly will, as instructed by the Mayor before, and we'll seek further advice. But again, we do rely on a cost summary report being prepared by an experienced and industry professional to make that statement about what the costs are and break those down, and we do have to rely on those to some extent. In some cases, we receive copies of contracts to verify that, and in other cases where the value of the work is significant, and Council considered this at a report earlier last year, where we imposed a minimum limit, I think it's $2 million of development, that requires a separate valuer's certificate to verify any of those costs for this purpose. I hope that helps to clarify.
Councillor Van der Ven.
Just a little bit of a follow-up, if it's possible at some stage, just to undertake some sort of a survey of where, informal survey if you like, to perhaps better inform ourselves and our staff about where the costs are in relation to building residential and commercial buildings. Just do an informal survey over a period of time, see if we can get the actual costs and see how much they varied against what was actually approved and charged as a DA or Section 94A contribution.
Mr. Keys.
Happy to take that on notice, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor King, you have a question?
A question through Mr. Mayor, relevant member of staff. Have we ever knocked back a development application because the costing's so far out of what we think's accurate?
Mr. Keys.
Mr. Mayor, thank you for the question, Councillor King. We have. We haven't refused the application. We have put it on hold and refused to process it further until we have verification and either further evidence from a recognised professional in the building industry, or sought a separate independent certified valuer on those costs. And we have done that on a number of occasions.
Councillor King.
Nothing further.
Thank you, Mr. Keys. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Cameron, you wish to speak against the motion?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, I won't go on at length. Planning issues are invariably very difficult, and we're lucky we're well served with very expert staff, and I'm very reluctant to go against the recommendation, usually. In this particular one, I have to weigh it up on the balances of what seems appropriate. It is, and draw a distinction possibly between what is permissible and what is correct or fair. I am persuaded by the objections in this particular matter. The setback of 1 centimetre seems to me to be contrived, and I won't be supporting this recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cameron. Councillor Gleichen, you have a question?
Thank you. Through you to the most relevant member of staff. Councillor Cameron's question was about 1 centimetre, and what is the purpose of having such a setback? And the answer was given by our staff that it does happen. So I was just wondering if I could gauge how frequently that does happen, and is this really out of the ordinary or not? I know we won't be able to get exact figures tonight, but if we could be given some indication that this happens on a very regular basis or a fairly regular basis, or it is unusual but it can happen type of answer. Thank you.
Please.
Through Mr Mayor, thank you Councillor Glacken for the request. I'd have to take that on notice. I would say though, I don't believe it is a highly regular occurrence. Typically you'll find in older sections of the city, there are a lot of buildings that are built on boundaries. Typically they may be rear walls, garages, sheds and the like, but certainly as lots are becoming smaller and people are looking to increase the area of the residents on those properties, we do have reductions in setbacks. It is an issue that has been highlighted for review as part of our residential DCP review, and certainly as part of that we can consider what number of applications we receive and what is the proliferance for that over the year.
Thank you. Councillor Cameron, you have another question?
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. To the most appropriate member of staff. I hope I'm not being a pedant and or being pedantic, but it just occurs to me that if a setback is of a boundary structure is 1 centimetre, there'd be no capacity to have a fence there unless the other party put the fence entirely on their own property. Would that be correct?
Mr Keys.
Through Mr Mayor, typically you would expect that the wall would then form part of the fence and be located inside their boundary, but in some occasions there is an existing fence. They try to locate adjacent to or directly abutting that fence, depending on how it's been constructed.
Councillor Con, you wish to speak for the DA.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I did spend a long time looking at this one, given the objections and the proposed height. I think with regards to the setbacks, the councillor interested development update that we get weekly has, on a regular basis, developments that are looking for exemptions from the DCP with regards to setbacks. It's something that is being looked at in the DCP review, and I don't think we can get caught up in developments one at a time. It would be hypocritical to dig into that tonight, having not done so for weeks and weeks on other developments that have had issues with setbacks. In terms of the height of this particular development, it can be difficult with the slope, but I've had a good look at the drawings. I've been convinced that it's not going to cause an issue with overshadowing to other properties, that it is appropriate for the area. It's very close to the CBD. I think it is appropriate that we're moving to a slightly higher density of housing in that location, and I will be supporting the DA.
Thank you, Councillor Con. So there are no further questions or debate. Just to finish up, I'd like to speak personally for the motion on the basis that visiting the particular street and Payne Place, there are developments in that precinct that are not heritage facades and certainly are more modern and more into the 21st century amenities. So on the basis of some of the objections, I think progress is really important in our city and certainly in our central areas. Secondly, I think the building that's existing there, looking at it, is close to being condemned because there's a lot of cracks and a lot of leaning going on in that building. So again, I think on the basis of what's existing, this is a good development, and I will be supporting this development and this application. Councillor Stutchbury, do you wish to close debate?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
On that note, I'll put the motion as division. All those in favour? Councillor Stutchbury, Councillor Doxey, Councillor Mack, Councillor Con, Councillor King, Councillor Glacken, Councillor Thurley and Councillor Vandervan. Those against? Councillor Cameron. Thank you, Councillor Cameron. The motion is carried. Officers' reports for noting CM 16.1 monthly development statistics for July 2018. Thank you, Councillor Glacken.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. To move the Our recommendation is the motion that Council receive and note and accept the information in the monthly development statistics for for August 2018 report. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Doxey.
Happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Clark, do you wish to speak to that?
No, thank you.
There being no question or debate, happy to put that. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. 16.2, the investment balances for August 2018. Councillor Vanderman.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move the council receive and note the investment balances report for the month of August 2018.
Thank you. Councillor Doxey.
Happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Vanderman, do you wish to speak to that?
Yes. Can I just, through you to the most relevant member of staff, we seem to get financial assistance grants, at different times of the year. What's happened this year to get them in August? We've had them previously in June to get them before the end of financial year. So what were those grants that we received during August, please?
Mr Finlayson.
Through you, Mr Mayor, the financial assistance grants that are received from the federal government ordinarily received in quarterly instalments throughout the financial year. The early payment that Councillor Vanderven is referring to relates to half of the balance of funds. So half of the financial assistance grants were received in June. Effectively, we're still receiving 4 instalments. They're just half the size of they otherwise would be.
Councillor Vanderven, happy with that response?
I think I understood that.
Did you have a follow-up?
No, I'll talk to him privately, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor King, question.
A question through you, Mr Mayor, to relevant member of staff. With the recent Royal Commission into banking, there's been some instances of overcharging by one of our institutions here, AMP. Has council done any auditing of our balances to see if any of these charges that have been raised in the Royal Commission apply to us?
Mr Finlayson.
Through you, Mr Mayor, I don't believe that with the nature of our term deposits we are charged by the banks. In terms of the interest received on the term deposits held with each of the institutions, that's something that's closely monitored and assessed by our auditors each financial year.
Councillor King.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Finlayson. Councillor Vanderven, you have a question?
I have another question, Mr Mayor.
Yes.
I note with some interest that we do have investments with all of the major financial institutions except one, and that one happens to be the transactional organisation that looks after council, which is the ANZ Bank. Is there a particular reason why they don't appear in our investment portfolio? Is it just that they do not have a competitive product in that market space?
Mr Finlayson.
Through you, Mr Mayor, Councillor Vanderven is correct. The interest rates offered by the ANZ on their term deposits are less than what we're able to achieve elsewhere.
Yep.
Is there any balances that are held with ANZ Bank in our transactional arrangements that would normally attract some interest?
Mr Finlayson.
Through you, Mr Mayor, thank you for the question, Councillor Vanderven. With respect of operational balances held, there is I don't believe there is interest earned on our operational account. The ANZ, as part of the transactional services offer they provide, do offer a at-call account where there's an interest rate available. However, we're able to get a slightly better interest rate elsewhere with respect to at-call accounts.
Yep.
So on that basis, do we make sure that we leave as little money in our ANZ accounts as we possibly can because there's no, if you like, penalties for moving money around on a daily basis. So on that basis, do we make sure that there's very little money left in ANZ and it's all put into places that provide us with better interest rates?
Mr Finlayson.
Through you, Mr Mayor, we do try and hold a minimal balance in our operational account with the ANZ. and we regularly move funds between that account and other at-call accounts. We endeavour to make sure we optimise the interest earned on the funds available, but at the same time make sure we've got enough funds to meet payroll costs and also accounts payable invoices on a weekly basis.
Yes.
To belabor the point. And did we know at the time that we approved the ANZ as the transactional banker for the AlburyCity that there was this, if you like, weakness, if you like, in their interest rates that were offered for these sorts of investments?
Mr. Finlayson.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, when assessing the tenders, there are a range of products and facilities offered as part of the banking services tender. The interest earned or potential interest earned with funds held wasn't part of the core assessment of the relative offer from a quantitative point of view of each of the banks, although overall the interest rate offered by the ANZ Bank on those at-call facilities, from my recollection, was actually stronger than what the other banks were offering that tendered for those services, but we've been able to utilise other institutions to get a better rate again for at-call funds.
That ends my inquisition. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor King, question.
Yeah, just another clarification through you, Mr. Mayor, to the relevant member of staff. So our operational account, where you said there was wages and paying accounts, does that attract any interest at all?
Mr. Finlayson.
Mr. Mayor, I don't believe it does attract any interest of any significance.
Councillor King.
A follow-up from that. What's the amount in that account, roughly?
Mr. Finlayson.
Thanks for the question. Through you, Mr. Mayor. The amount varies. Generally, we would try and hold a minimum balance of around $1 million. However, sometimes that needs to be higher to cover upcoming payments, such as weekly payroll or weekly payments to suppliers. And also, it does vary depending on the time of the year and when we receive cash inflows, whether that's rate instalments, water receipts from ratepayers and the like. So it does vary.
Councillor King.
Just follow up, Mr. Mayor, through you. Can I assume that at no time it falls below $1 million?
Mr. Finlayson.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, very rarely does it fall below $1 million. We do try and maintain that buffer to cover any unexpected payments that we might need to meet, and we also do maintain capacity by having a bank overdraft facility available. However, that's rarely, if ever, used.
Follow up from that. Would it be more prudent to actually just shift the money when it's required from an account that attracts some, even the minimal interest rate of $1 million, which at 1% is 10 grand, rather than just leaving it sitting in the ANZ, them using our money for no return on us, for us?
Mr. Finlayson.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, thank you for the question, Councillor King. We do try and find a balance between optimising the interest earned on funds available and avoiding the costs of going into overdraft. The costs of going into overdraft outweigh any advantages of maintaining an even lower balance of funds available in our operational account. We do have some regular payments that are deducted from our bank account and that we need to make sure that we can cover at any point in time as well.
Councillor King.
Just follow up. I just can't find it on the report, but I recall I might have seen that we've got $10 million at call. Is that correct?
Mr. Finlayson.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, in reviewing the report, yes, we do have in the order of $10 million held at call, and that's for a couple of reasons. One being the timing of receipts of funds from customers and ratepayers, but also needing to maintain funds available to meet supplier costs in the not too distant future from the August month end.
Councillor King.
Yeah, follow up. Do we pay overdraft costs if we do go into the overdraft?
Mr Finlayson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. With respect to overdraft costs, there is a relatively small cost to maintain a facility. However, there is also then a charge if you utilise the facility. So we try and avoid that cost by maintaining positive funds in our bank account.
Councillor King.
One more. Is that overdraft cost higher than the interest that we get from our at-call account?
Mr Finlayson.
Through Mr Mayor, thanks for the question. I don't know the rate off the top of my head, but I do expect that it's far above any interest that we would otherwise earn, and I can follow that up.
Happy to take that on notice. Thank you, Mr Finlayson. Councillor King.
That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. You did well, Mr Finlayson. You're not on the cross yet. Thank you, mate. Okay, we had a mover, which was Councillor Vanderman. Did you wish to close debate?
No,
Councillor
thank you,
Vanderman?
Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Happy to put that motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? Thank you. We're all carried. June quarter budget review 16.4. Councillor Cameron. Events economic. Did I jump that one? Yeah. 16.3. Sorry.
I'd like
Ms Squire. Councillor Cameron, do you want to move that one?
Unless you want Ms Squire to do it.
No, you can.
Thank you. 2 more years, eh?
It's a report.
Recommendation that Council receive and note the 217/18 Events Economic Impact Report.
Thank you. Councillor Doxey.
Happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Cameron, wish to open it?
No, thank you.
Thank you. There being no questions or debate, happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. We have 16.4, June quarter budget review. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that Council receive and note the analysis of AlburyCity's financial performance for the 2017-18 financial year compared to forecast.
Thank you. Councillor Doxey.
Happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, I see you've just put your question light on, but I also have another question from Councillor Glacken. Councillor Glacken.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Through you to the most relevant member of staff. I note in the report there's a couple of references to the Regional Growth and Environment Grant Program, and I believe we've received recently, fantastically, we've received a couple of $1 million towards some programs throughout the city. I'm also conscious of the fact that we have had a regretfully, we have again had to carry forward some works from last year, which is not surprising, noting we continue to add work to our program throughout the year, etc. However, can I confirm with the staff that noting we've received this funding and noting that we've had some carry forward already, how are we placed to be able to ensure that these programs come to fruition, finalised, and how difficult will it be for us to meet the requirements of the government to ensure that we follow the timing, the parameters that they would have for us to do. Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Mr Lawson.
Thanks for the question. Through you, Mr Mayor. Certainly, we program all our works to try and achieve a positive result in excess of 95%. At this stage, we're well placed to try and achieve that again this year. Certainly, from a resourcing perspective, with regard to particularly in our design team, we've really starting to move forward in that area, in that we're able to certainly churn out a lot of a lot of works with regard to contracts and getting those contracts out, which you would notice coming through council. So depending on the timing of that particular grant that you're talking about and what the delivery period of that will be, there should be no reason as to why we couldn't meet the requirements of that grant.
Councillor Gluck, are you comfortable with that?
Just to clarify that we will actually prioritise, I believe we should look to prioritising those works. So if I could just have a confirmation from the General Manager that sufficient prioritisation will take place to ensure that those programs for which we are receiving additional funding for will be a priority as opposed to some other general works.
Thank you. Mr Zaknich?
Well, the works, now that we've received the funding, the works can be prioritised, and that'll be reported back to council to ensure that they're prioritised. The second component of funding is allocation of project officer roles to these new projects. So those positions are in place from the first round of funding that we received, and they're also now tasked with delivering the second round of projects, bearing in mind that all those projects aren't council projects. Some are PCYC, etc. So yeah, well placed to deliver on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Gluck. And Councillor Thurley, question.
They might be the two different members of staff, but the first one, I note an adverse performance against budget for the Retro Cafe operations. I wonder, is there a significant reason for that? And the other one is a huge increase in water consumption income, and I assume that that's because of particularly dry conditions, but to me it also signals a rather alarming situation if the dry continues and this water consumption continues at the rate at which it seems to have been in that quarter.
So, Ms Code, first question, Retro Cafe.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, through you. With regard to the Retro Cafe, the 17-18 income was pretty close. We pretty much got that, but the expenses were unexpectedly high. We had additional expenses in staffing, as well as additional expenses in equipment costs and set-up costs. We are looking at our staffing going forward, and we are reviewing our business plan and working towards increasing that and improving that outcome.
And the second question, Mr Lawson.
Thank you for the question, through you, Mr Mayor. Yes, certainly we would expect that the dry weather has seen an increase in water usage, which would obviously flow on to the income. But certainly our water volumes are tracking relatively similar to previous years.
Councillor Thurley, comfortable with that?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Question, Councillor Vanderman.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I don't know whether this just needs to be a question on notice to relevant member of staff, but over the time I've often made reference to the fact that we either are below or above budget when we approve tenders for council works. Am I able to request that in future the report, this particular report, actually details each of those tenders in the relevant areas to show what part of the improvement or deterioration that formed as part of the budget update each quarter? Thank you.
Mr Zaknich.
Yes, that's certainly, Councillor Vandervan. Last time you requested that, we did include that in the contracts attachment where we indicate the tender acceptance by council, what the budget was and what the variance was. So that's in the attachment to the report, in the contracts and tenders listing, which we provide on a quarterly basis.
Thank you. Just one question for myself, probably to Mr Lawson. In relation to the funding that appears to be coming out of the New South Wales government, and with a Victorian election pending and funding coming out of the Victorian government, I was chatting to a fellow councillor who was waxing lyrically the other day about civil contractors and their availability. Has there been any evidence to suggest that potentially there's going to be a dearth of tender is available to finish any major works that are in the offering? I know we've got 2 or 3 out with the New South Wales government at the moment. One in particular I think about is Davey Road, and I know that's an RMS job, but also Nexus and other jobs. Are you seeing any patterns of behaviour in relation to shortage of quality contractors?
Thank you for the question, through you, Mr Mayor. Certainly, no, not at this stage. We haven't seen any real evidence with regard to certainly price increases or lack of tenderers putting submissions in for tenders. So, yeah, certainly we haven't seen that at this stage.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, do you wish to open or close debate on this item?
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. The corporate health indicator 16.5. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that Council receive and note the June 2018 Corporate Health Indicators report.
Councillor Glacken.
Happy to second that.
Councillor Thurley, just have a question. Do you wish me to take the question?
Yes, please.
Councillor Con.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Through you to the relevant member of staff, please. Noting in the report that staff overtime costs were 16% greater than expected in the budget. Just wondering what led to that cost, please.
Mr Lawson.
Again, thank you for the question, through you, Mr Mayor. Certainly, there has been, in last year's works program, there were some significant projects that were in high-profile areas. So what we do tend to do there is try and increase a little bit of overtime to ensure that we're not impacting residents and so forth. One of those projects was in Griffith Street, which was a fairly major project. We were in there for some time, and obviously to try and reduce the impact to residents of the build, we try and do a lot of work outside of normal work hours to squeeze that in. There were others not as significant as that, but certainly that was probably one of the main ones in the civil area. With the airport build, there was obviously some operational reasons around overtime there, in that staff had to work outside normal hours to ensure that operations were maintained and continued. And those were probably the main 2 areas, I guess.
Councillor Con.
Thank you. Follow-up question, please. Those projects, the impacts on residents and operations at the airpact, I assume, would have been anticipated for some time. Just hoping with the council's new project management framework, be worth noting the expense that we've incurred here and taking into account that sort of overtime in future projects.
Okay. Mr Lawson.
Yeah, thanks for that, through you, Mr Mayor. Yeah, certainly we'll take that on notice.
Thank you. Councillor Glacken, you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. Through you to the most relevant member of staff, my reading of this report indicates to me that whilst there was a 16% increase in overtime costs, that was a total of $162,000. And whilst it also says that the majority of the variance was with regards to those works programs, there would otherwise be other areas that would have worked towards that 162,000. But I also notice on the page before that it says that total employee costs were down by 2.6%. If we look at the percentage in isolation, that is not very much, but it is a total of 1.1 million. So I'm thinking that part of the $162,000 overspend or increased expenditure on overtime costs would be well counted for within the 1.1 million for payroll that is less than the original budgeted amounts. And I would also believe, and this is where I would like clarification, please, that part of the expenditure for the additional overtime costs would be for positions that are vacant, as it says here, mainly due to vacant positions in the $1.1 million less spend on total employee costs. Thank you.
Mr Lawson, did you get all that?
It's not necessarily...
Mr Finlayson, did you want to have a go at that one?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will have a go. Thank you for the question. So with respect to total employee costs compared to overtime, as the graphs indicate, total payroll costs are in the order of around $40 million for the year, whereas employee overtime in total is in the order of 1.2 million, if I read that correctly. So it's a component of total employee costs. The reason why overall, including overtime total employee costs, were less than budget is mainly due to vacant positions that were expected to be filled during the year.
Thank you. Councillor Gluckin, comfortable with that?
Yes, if I could confirm also, please, then that part of the reason for having some of the additional overtime costs would be directly related to filling some of the duties of people or positions that are currently vacant.
Mr. Finlayson?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, thank you for the question. Yes, that could be part of the rationale. It could also be, as Mr. Lawson pointed out, the nature of some large projects. When preparing our annual budget, it's at an individual employee level, and looking at historically what overtime have they required. But we do need to maintain that awareness of major projects or major activities that may be coming up in the forward year, which may change that historical requirement.
Councillor Vanderman, question.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to refer to electronic page 154, bottom right, development application processing, and again where processing time for development application was higher than target in the June quarter. We've been told on a number of occasions that our staffing issues are slowly being addressed. I'd like to see that come through in the numbers. Where are we at? Who are we looking for? How many places are still unfilled?
Thank you. Mr. Keys.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for the question, Councillor Van der Ven. The biggest issue there is we're actually determining some of these applications that have been sitting in our system for a long period of time, and hence the averages go right up. Currently, at the moment, we've just advertised for a group leader of development, waiting to try and fill that position, but otherwise our teams are relatively full. We have still got a large number of applications that are being processed and some complex situations and reports that are being prepared.
Thank you, Councillor Vandervan. Just a question and follow-up to that one, Mr. Keys. It would appear, though, that the total number is well over 800, which again is a substantial number as a comparator for other years. Is that correct, as you read it to the graph?
Through Mr. Mayor, the total number of applications received this previous year was slightly below the previous 2 years, but it's certainly on a par and it's a high level of development activity.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Councillor Thurley, do you wish to speak to that?
Just very briefly, Mr. Mayor. I think the signs for corporate health are pretty good. I'll get back on my hobby horse, which probably people would expect of me. And I note the lost time injury frequency rate of 8.6. It's down from a high of approximately 12, but it is nowhere near as good as the lowest we've had. Once again, I'm asking that the appropriate amount of attention be given to this matter, and I do acknowledge that there are some new initiatives and programs coming online in that space, so I look forward to this number coming down. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. On that note, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Delegates' reports for noting 17.1, the Murray-Darling Association Conference. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move that Council receive and note my report.
Councillor Gluckin.
I'm very happy to second Councillor Thurley's recommendation as a motion.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, comprehensive report. Did you want to speak to it?
Just very briefly, and I have a copy of the Murray-Darling Association's annual report and the conference program, which I'll leave in the councillors' room if they anyone wishes to look at it. There were a number of significant matters that occurred at the conference. The two most important are that the Productivity Commission released their 5-year report into the Murray-Darling Basin Authority and the Murray-Darling Basin Plan, and that was generally speaking positive, with a couple of issues that the MDBA might need to look at, especially relating to timelines to achieve the results required. The other most important one that everyone who's watched Four Corners and so on would be aware of is the matter of compliance with the plan and the regulations. And probably the worst state in that was New South Wales. And the Minister had some time ago announced what he calls the National Resources Access Regulator. And it's only been operating for 120 days. They've made 300 site visits. They're investigating 30 specific cases of lack of conformity, and they've issued 100 advisory letters. The slogan for the NRAR is to make it easy to comply and painful not to, and I see significant evidence that that will be the case. So the conference itself was useful, comprehensive, good speakers, and I would once again encourage this council to put in an EOI for the 2020 conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. On that note, I'm happy to move the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. The final item, we have no confidential matters. Urgent business. Do we have any urgent business, councillors? I've been made aware of one item. Councillor Cameron.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I was, as councillors and General Manager will be aware, I was unhappy to learn that there had been consultation between Aligned Leisure and council staff, but not directly with the councillors. Regardless of the, and I'm referring now to their new fee structure when I say Aligned Leisure, without trawling through the whole issue again, I'd like to know, if we do know, what came out of the meeting today between stakeholders and Aligned Leisure. Through you, Mr Mayor, the most appropriate member of staff.
Ms Code.
Thank you, through you, Mr Mayor. Thank you for the question. As you've indicated, there was a meeting today, which, as I understand, was a productive meeting. However, further discussions are going to be had during the week in order to come to a resolution that meets the needs of all the parties.
Well, could you elaborate on what productive means, please?
I myself wasn't at the meeting, through you, Mr Mayor. I've just had a quick update. It was, the aim of the meeting was to get to understand the various parties and the issues and to see what is the appropriate way forward. I couldn't at this stage comment what was actually discussed because I haven't received an in-depth briefing, nor was I at the meeting.
Councillor Cameron.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd just foreshadow that I don't regard this matter as closed and there may be further discussion of this in future council meetings.
Thank you, Councillor Cameron. Ms Code, just on that note, I take it Aligned Leisure are dealing with this as an urgent issue given the water polo and the swim clubs have potentially they've paused their seasons, as I would suggest, until they resolve it. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr Mayor, yes, they are dealing with this as a priority item.
Thank you. Councillor King, question?
Yeah, through you, Mr Mayor. Did we have a representative from council at that meeting?
Ms Code.
Through you, Mr Mayor, thank you for the question. The meeting today was with a representative of AlburyCity recreation staff, Wodonga recreation staff, Aligned Leisure and the interested users. We do have a further meeting planned later on in the week with mayoral and general manager representation if required.
Thank you. Councillor Vandervan.
I did have some urgent business, but
Yeah.
I just want to follow up on that, on this last one. I thought with the contract that was let to Aligned Leisure that there was a set scale and set scale of charges that were to be applied. So I'm failing to understand how they can, within 5 weeks of, well, maybe 8 weeks of commencing, that they can do this to some of the user groups.
Ms Code. Just a comment. Okay, thank you.
My urgent business.
Yes.
I would like council to consider imposition of water restrictions around fixed sprinklers on the basis of showing some empathy for those places that don't have the amount of water available that we have. It is not rocket science to suggest that people should be doing that. Anyway, having sprinklers on at night time rather than daytime, but I think we need to be showing our community and the rest of other drought affected communities that we are not just paying lip service to their predicament, but also doing something about saving water.
So, Councillor Vanderven, is there a motion that you propose that that the staff consider for further discussion? Report.
Look, I'd like to leave it as in terms of an idea that perhaps you and the General Manager can pursue, and perhaps bring it back to a next meeting of council with some potential recommendations from that.
Yeah, I know that just for information, Ramjo has been speaking to councils early this year about water usage and in general what the situation is in terms of our water storages. So there is some conversation about water and conservation of water.
And I got a bit of a briefing from Mr. Lawson when I raised the issue with the General Manager around where we sit with this. We'd have to have a very good community consultation process around this. But I just think that this drought is epic, and whilst it might not amount to a lot in the scheme of things, I think we need to be showing some leadership in this issue.
Thank you, Councillor Van. Question from Councillor Con.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Through to the relevant member of staff who will be providing us with this information, noting that I believe water restrictions are going to be looked at as part of the integrated water cycle management strategy that the Sustainability Advisory Committee's just spent a lot of time trying to get our heads around. Just hoping to make sure that that report includes what the potential implications for AlburyCity would be of compulsory water restrictions, particularly our own parks, gardens and sports grounds, etc.
Mr Sacknage.
Yes, certainly. We'll bring all that information back to you for the 8th of October council meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Con. There being no further urgent business, I'm happy to finish the meeting at 7:52. Thank you, councillors. Thank you, staff.